Before we begin, I want to make something very clear. This video is not going to be a simple review of Hereditary. I'm not going to spend 15 minutes telling you that it has great acting, amazing scenes, or that the director is a talented director, because those things are already obvious. What I want to examine is why this movie continues to disturb people years after they watch it, and why so many viewers describe it as one of the most unsettling horror experiences they have ever had. Hereditary is not frightening just because of what happens on screen. It's frightening because of the way it makes you rethink everything you just watched. To do that, we're going to examine the themes of grief, trauma,
And I know you miss her. And I know it was an accident.
occult symbolism, demonology,
Hail Payman!
and the real historical beliefs that inspired parts of the film. So if those subjects make you uncomfortable, consider this your warning.
Wake up. There's your suit.
The reason Hereditary stands apart from most modern horror movies is because it refuses to give the audience the things horror normally gives us. It does not give us a clear villain walking around in the shadows. It does not give us a monster with recognizable shape. And it definitely doesn't give us the comfort of knowing exactly when the horror begins. Instead, the director starts the movie with something more realistic, a family that is already damaged. Before anything supernatural happens, the Graham family is already carrying something. Annie is dealing with the death of her mother, Charlie is isolated and emotionally disconnected, and Peter is struggling with guilt and resentment. And Steve is desperately trying to hold everyone together while watching his family collapse around him. The supernatural elements are terrifying, but what makes them effective is that the family is already vulnerable before anything supernatural happens. The horror does not enter a perfect world and destroy it. The horror enters a world that is already cracked. And that is one of the most important ideas behind the entire film. The title itself tells you what this story is about. Hereditary, something passed down, something inherited, something you receive whether you want it or not. One of the most disturbing ideas in Hereditary is that the Graham family is trapped by something they did not choose. Annie spends much of the film fighting against the idea that her family history controls her. She believes she can separate herself from the damage that came before her. She believes she can understand it, analyze it, contain it. And that is why the miniature scenes are so important. Annie creates models of traumatic events because creating them gives her something she desperately wants: control. Inside those tiny rooms, she decides where everything goes. She decides where every person stands. She decides how the moment it's remembered. But the tragedy of the film is that Annie's own life begins to resemble one of those miniatures. A carefully arranged scene where everyone has a position, but nobody has control. And this is where Hereditary becomes much more deeper than a traditional supernatural horror movie. The family trauma and the supernatural story are not separate ideas, they mirror each other. The family believes they inherited pain, the cult believes they inherited a purpose. One sees the bloodline as a curse, the other sees it as an opportunity. The grandmother, Ellen, is one of the most important characters in the entire film, and she is already gone before the story even begins. That is not a coincidence. Hereditary is not a story about something entering this family. It's a story about something that was already there. Ellen's influence is not shown through dramatic scenes or direct confrontation. It exists in fragments, in memories, in details that don't seem important the first time you see them. Annie describes her as a secretive, controlling, and someone who had a strange and unsettling relationship with her own children. And if you pay attention, the film quietly suggests something even more disturbing. Ellen was just not a difficult parent, she was actively shaping the people around her. There are small details scattered throughout the film that begin to connect once you know what to look for. Photographs, symbols, people at the funeral who seem out of place. Charlie's behavior, the way Ellen tried to get close to Peter before she died. None of these moments feel significant on their own, but together they start to form a pattern, and that pattern leads to a realization that changes the entire movie. Ellen was not reacting to events, she was preparing for them. And that is what separates Hereditary from most horror stories. In movies like The Exorcist, evil arrives. it invades, it disrupts. There is a clear moment where everything changes. But in Hereditary, there is no clear beginning, because the horror did not start with Annie, it didn't start with Charlie, and it didn't start when something supernatural appeared on the screen. The scene that most people remember from Hereditary is the accident, and the reason it stays with people is because it feels so sudden, so brutal, and so real. There's no music building toward it, there's no warning, it just happens. And for a moment, the movie feels grounded in something completely human. A terrible mistake, a moment of panic, a decision that cannot be undone. But what makes Hereditary so unsettling is what happens when you step back and look at that moment in the context of everything else we've discussed. Because the film quietly invites a question that becomes harder to ignore the more you think about it. What is actually random? Peter is pressured into taking Charlie to the party. Charlie eats something she shouldn't. She has an allergic reaction at exactly the wrong time.
Are you okay?
It's hard to breathe.
What do you mean?
I think my throat's getting bigger.
Peter drives too fast. There is something in the road that forces him to swerve, and the outcome is immediate. Irreversible. Individually, each of these moments feels like a chance, like the kind of terrible sequence of events that could happen to anyone. But Hereditary is not structured like a story that relies on coincidence. It is structured like a story that builds toward a result. And when you start to look at the details more closely, the scene becomes much more complicated. The placement of events, the timing, the way everything aligns at exactly the right moment to produce a specific outcome. The film never tells you that this was orchestrated, and this is what makes it more disturbing, because instead of giving you a clear answer, it leaves you with the possibility. The moment everyone remembers as a tragic accident might actually be part of a larger design. And if that possibility is true, then the most terrifying part of the scene is not what happens to Charlie, it is what it means for everyone else, because if that moment was not random, then nothing that follows is either. It started long before any of them were aware of it, and by the time the story begins, it may already be too late to stop. This brings us to the center of everything happening in Hereditary. Not the family, not the house, not even the tragedy, but the idea that all of it is connected to something much older. Hymen. Now this is the point where most people either lean into the horror or start to question how much of this is actually grounded in real belief systems. Because Pyman is not something the film invented. The name appears in historical demonology texts, most notably in a grimoire known as the Lesser Key of Solomon, which dates back several centuries. In those writings, Pyman is described as a king, a figure associated with knowledge, influence, and hierarchy, a being that does not simply appear but is summoned, placed, and established. And that distinction matters, because Hereditary does not present Pyman as a chaotic force, it presents him as something that requires structure, a process. A series of steps that must be completed correctly, and once you understand that, the entire movie starts to feel different. This is not a story about a random haunting. It is not a story about a spirit attaching itself to a family. It's a story about a ritual, a long, deliberate process designed to achieve a very specific outcome. And the most unsettling part is that the people in the movie are not discovering that process. They are inside of it.
Mom, I'm sorry, okay? I'm sorry! Mommy, please, I'm begging you to stop!
One of the biggest mistakes people make when discussing Hereditary is looking at Charlie as simply the tragic victim who begins the downfall of the family. And obviously, she is a victim.
Charlie! Leaving the house barefoot. You some kind of idiot. You can't roam around with no shoes and no coat.
I want Grandma.
She is a child who is caught in something she cannot understand. But when you look at the larger structure of the story, Charlie becomes something much more complicated. Charlie is not just the beginning of the horror, she is evidence that the horror began long before we ever entered the story. From the very first moments we see her, the director tells us that something about Charlie does not fit. Not in an obvious supernatural way. The movie never gives us a scene where Charlie suddenly becomes completely a different person. Instead, it creates a feeling, a sense that Charlie exists slightly outside the world around her. She struggles to connect with other people. She creates disturbing little sculptures from animals and insects, and she reacts to things in ways that feel disconnected from what we expect. And the important thing is that the film never treats this as a simple character trait. It feels like a clue. But the most important detail about Charlie comes from understanding what the cult actually wants. Their goal is not simply to create chaos. They are not trying to destroy the Graham family. They are trying to accomplish something specific. According to the mythology established within the film, Hyman requires a male host. And that changes the way we look at Charlie completely. Because if the goal was always a male host, then Charlie was never the final destination. She was a step in the process, a temporary vessel. She was just a way of keeping the plan moving forward until the correct person was ready. And this is what makes Charlie's story so disturbing. Because her tragedy is not just that she dies, it is that within the logic of the film, her entire existence was shaped around a purpose she never had the ability to understand. The reason I believe Hereditary is one of the greatest horror movies ever made is not because it has the most shocking scenes. It is not because it has the most disturbing images, and is not even because of the supernatural elements. Those things matter, but they are not what makes the movie unforgettable. What makes Hereditary different is that it understands something much deeper about fear. The things that truly haunt people are not always monsters. Sometimes they are the things that feel impossible to escape. Your family, your past, your trauma. Patterns you inherit without realizing it. That is why the title is so important, because the word hereditary does not only describe a family's connection, it describes something passed down, something carried, something that continues through generations. And that is what makes this movie so disturbing, because even after the supernatural elements are removed, the emotional horror remains. The idea that people can spend their entire lives fighting battles that started before they were even born. But when you add the supernatural layer back in, the film becomes something even darker. Because now the question changes. Instead of asking, how do we escape what happened to our family? The movie asks, what if what happened to our family was always leading somewhere? And that is why Hereditary stays with people. Because after the credits roll, people don't just remember what they saw, they think about what they missed. The background details, the conversations, the symbols, the moments that seem meaningless until they weren't.
Oh, hey. It's all right. Charlie,
The movie forces you to look back. It leaves you with the same unforgettable thought.
you're all right now.
Maybe the scariest things about Hereditary was never the demon.
You are Paimon, one of the 8 kings of hell.
Maybe the scariest thing was the idea that the characters were never truly in control. Because the greatest horror does not always come from something chasing you. It comes from the possibility that something has been waiting for you the entire time.